Today, inshallah, we are going to start with a new chapter, chapter number 8, which extends our analysis and discussion of the topic variance analysis. Of course, as we saw in chapter number 7, the variance analysis was focused upon only the direct materials and the direct manufacturing labor, therefore the direct section of the costs. Now we are going to extend our discussion in chapter number 8 to include the variable manufacturing overhead and the fixed manufacturing overhead variance analysis. Of course, we started our analysis or the variance analysis in chapter number 7 by introducing a new term which we called a standard costing, or something called, or a method that is called standard costing. And we compared this term with the term of normal costing and actual costing, and we said what is the differences, and we pointed the differences between these three terms. Of course, we said that according to a standard costing, system, that we are going to trace the direct costs according to the standard quantity and the standard prices, which we saw or which we used in chapter number 7 and in the variance analysis that we took for the direct materials and the direct manufacturing labor. Now we want to consider how we are going to use the standard costing, but for the variable manufacturing overhead and the fixed manufacturing overhead. And also we said in chapter number 7 that a standard costing system will allocate the manufacturing overhead expenses, the indirect costs, using the standard rates, the budgeted rates, as the normal costing, but also using the standard quantities of the allocation base. Of course, for the actual output. That means, not like the normal costing, we are going to multiply the budgeted rate by the actual number of units of the allocation base, but instead in the standard costing, we are going to multiply the budgeted rate by the standard quantity for the actual output that has been produced. Of course, this was introduced in chapter number 7, and we are going to build upon this method or this type of costing systems. Any question? Any questions at all? Therefore, we need now to understand, if we are going to use the standard costing, we need to understand how we are going to determine these rates or these standards. So what do you think are the steps that needs to be done in order to set or determine the standard for the variable manufacturing overhead and the standard for the fixed manufacturing overhead? What do you think are the steps? What do we need to do in order to determine the standards? Of course, this discussion or this analysis or this topic has been covered in Cost Accounting 1 as well as in Cost Accounting 2 in chapter number 5 and chapter number 7. So what do you think we need to do in order to develop the standard for the variable manufacturing overhead first of all, and then let us see for the fixed manufacturing overhead? Yes?
Choose the period that will to be used for the monthly.
Therefore, first of all, we need to determine what is the period that we are going to calculate these rates or standards for. And of course, in Cost Accounting 1, we said that the best period to be used in allocating and in determining the rates is a 12-month period. Who can tell me why is it a 12-month period? Why do we need to have a 1 year as the period that we are going to consider for the future? Why not 1 month? Why not 6 months? Yes?
Because at 12 months will be more changes that occur. Then we have to study all the changes that happened in this period. 1 month, maybe no changes for me.
And you are right about one point. There's a problem in varying costs or varying amounts, which is the change that you are talking about, but more elaboration. Of course, in Cost Accounting 1, we have discussed this topic in details. Why do we need to use a 12-month period, not less than a 12-month period? Yes?
For seasonality reasons.
Excellent, excellent. In order to reduce the seasonality factors, first of all. Of course, in calculating any rate or any standard rate or any budgeted rate, we need to divide the cost or the cost pool, which is of course an indirect cost pool, by the number of units of the allocation base, or the total number of units of the allocation base. Therefore, we need to consider a 12-month period because of two problems that might arise if we considered a less period than a 12-month period. First of all, we have the numerator problem, and then, excellent, we have the denominator problem. First of all, the cost pool from 1 month to another could change only because of seasonality factors. For instance, between winter and the summer. Therefore, in order to reduce these factors or seasonality factors, we are going to consider the whole year, which takes into consideration all of the seasons. Correct? Therefore, we are reducing any seasonality factors that could be there or could occur between 1 month and another. The second thing, it could be erratic changes in the cost pool itself. Something that is not considered with seasonality, but sometimes we have some erratic changes in the cost pool from one period to another, from 1 month to another, and so on. Therefore, if we are considering the whole amount or the whole year as 1 unit, therefore we are going to reduce these erratic factors or these seasonality factors. Of course, this discussion was discussed in details in Cost Accounting 1. We are not going to go through again this discussion. The second problem is the number of units or the total number of units of the allocation base. Also, we need to consider
the number of units of the denominator increase, the rate will be smaller.
Of course, any change in the number of units of the allocation base would most definitely have its effect on the budgeted rate. This is 100% correct. But why do we need a 12-month, not a less than this or less than 12-month period, considering the denominator level? Because as we all know, that we might have varying amounts of output from one period or from 1 month to another. In order to reduce this varying amounts of the number of units of the allocation base, we need to consider a 12-year period. In order to reduce the changes of the allocation base or the number of units of the allocation base between 1 month and the other. Of course, if you do not understand, go back to chapter number 4 in Cost Accounting 1 in order to understand what we mean by this, because we have discussed this in details. Therefore, number 1, the first important thing that we need to do is choose a budgeted period or a budgeting period, which is most definitely should be a 12-month period. The second step, what we are going to do, now we are going to consider the same steps that we took in Cost Accounting 1, chapter number 4, in order to determine the rate, in order to determine the budgeted rate. First of all, what do we need? Do we need to consider what is the cost pool, or first we need to consider what is the allocation base? Therefore, first step is to consider what is the allocation base, and then we need to go back and consider what is the cost for this allocation base, or what is the cost pool that has a cost driver or that has this allocation base. Therefore, step number 2, as we can see here, we need to select the cost allocation bases to use in allocating variable overhead costs to output produced. Of course, according to our web example, of course, we are going to use the same example of web company. Therefore, according to web company's example, they used the machine hours, or they selected the machine hours to be the allocation base or the cost allocation base. And and as we said in Cost Accounting 1, if we only have one allocation base, that means we will only have one cost pool, which means we will only have one budgeted rate or standard rate. Of course, according to their analysis, they found out that each jacket needs 0.4 machine hours. And of course, this is a standard number of machine hours per 1 unit of the product or jacket. And according to their analysis, according to their expectations, they expect for the year 2011 to produce 144,000 jackets or units. Therefore, if they know that each jacket needs 0.4 machine hours, therefore 144,000 jackets multiplied by 0.4 machine hours, therefore they expect to have an amount of 57,600 machine hours in order to produce the 144,000 jackets. Therefore, they first of all set how much resources, in this case machine hours, that is needed to produce one product, and we need to determine how many products we need to produce in order to determine or calculate what is the amount of machine hours that is needed to produce the expected amount of products. Of course, as we can see here, the 144,000 is a much more larger number than the 10,000 units that we took in the example. But this 144,000 is for a 12-month period. It is not only for 1 month. It is not only for the month of April, but this number is for the whole year. Of course, after setting what is the allocation base, we need to consider what is the cost for this allocation base, or what is the cost pool that needs to be allocated on the different products or the different cost objects. Therefore, step number 3, identifying the variable overhead costs associated with each cost allocation base. Of course, in this case, we have only one allocation base, therefore we will only have one cost pool. Of course, according to our example, they determined, or they are expecting to have $1,728,000 as variable manufacturing overhead costs in the year 2011, I think. Therefore, we determined the allocation base, we determined the cost pool. Now, what is the last step? We need to calculate the budgeted rate. If I have determined this amount, or the denominator, and then determined the numerator, therefore we could now calculate the budgeted or the standard rate for the variable manufacturing overhead. Of course, In computing the rate, we need to divide the cost pool by the amount of 1,728,000 by the number of units, or the total number of units of the allocation base, which is in this case the machine hours, by the amount of 57,600. Therefore, the rate would be $30 per standard machine hour. Per standard machine hour. Why standard? Because we are considering here a standard number of machine hours, and also we are considering the standard costs, or the cost pool for the variable manufacturing overhead. Therefore, the standard budgeted rate, or the budgeted rate for the variable manufacturing overhead, first of all, we need to choose the budgeted period. We need to select the cost driver, or the allocation base. Then we need to identify or select or determine the costs for this, or that is associated with this allocation base. And then at last we need to compute the standard rate, or the budgeted rate for this or for these costs, or for this type of costs. Any questions? Therefore, as we can see here, it is the same steps that we took in Cost Accounting 1, the same steps that we took in Cost Accounting 2 in chapter number 5, when we talked about the activity-based costing. Now let us consider in planning our variable manufacturing overhead, we need to consider something very important. Of course, as we can see here, setting or determining the budgeted or standard rates needs from the organization to have something called planning of these costs. Therefore, in order to determine the standard rate, first of all, we need to plan the variable manufacturing overhead that would be incurred. Of course, as we took in Cost Accounting 1, in order to be successful, we need to consider the value chain. Therefore, in planning our variable manufacturing overhead cost, as well as the fixed manufacturing overhead costs, we need to determine that these costs are of activities that would add value to the product or service. Because as we said in Cost Accounting 1, in chapter number 1, the first thing we said in our course, we said that we need to have, or we need to emphasize and focus upon the activities that would add value to the customers, that would add value to the products or services that are being introduced in the market, in order to have a competitive advantage, in order for the customer to feel that he spent the price of this product, or let us say he will spend the price of this product. Because if he feels that he is overspending in a specific service or a product, he will not, or he may switch to other competitors that may give him a more competitive or a more value in the product or service. Therefore, in planning our fixed manufacturing overhead costs, in planning our variable manufacturing overhead costs, we need to consider this, which is an important thing to consider. We need to focus and emphasize upon the activities that adds value. We need to emphasize them. We need to focus upon them. And any activities that does not add value to the product or to the customer, we need to try and omit. We need to try and reduce these activities as hard as we can. Any questions? Of course, this goes for the fixed as well as the variable manufacturing overhead. Now, again, how we are going to set the standard for the fixed manufacturing overhead, the same as the variable. First of all, we need to choose the period, which is a 12-month, and we said, why do we need to set it as a 12-month period? Because of the numerator problem and because of the denominator problem. the second thing, we need to select or determine the allocation base. Of course, as we saw that the allocation base was for the web company is the machine hours, only one allocation base, therefore we are going to have only one cost pool and only one standard rate. Of course, according to the determined number of machine hours per jacket and the number of units to be produced in the 12-month period, we did set that we need 57,600 machine hours in order to produce the 144,000 jackets. After, of course, selecting the allocation base, we need to determine the cost pool that is associated with this allocation base, and according to a web company, they determined to have a $3,312,000 in order, or that will be incurred in order to maintain or in order to carry out their activities. Now, of course, if we identified the allocation base and we set or identified the cost pool, therefore, the step number 4 is the most obvious one. We need to calculate the standard rate or the budgeted rate by dividing the cost pool by the total number of units. Therefore, the $3,312,000 should be divided by 57,600 machine hours. Therefore, the cost is $57.5. Here, we are talking about fixed manufacturing overhead cost. Therefore, when we determine this amount, when we analyze this amount, we need to consider it carefully. We need to analyze this number carefully, because any unexperienced person or any inexperienced individual, when he sees this number $57.5 per machine hour, he might think that each machine hour would cost us $57.5, and if we do not have any machine hours, if we did not have any operations that use the machine hours, we will not have any fixed expenses, which is dead wrong. Why? Because fixed manufacturing overhead expenses or fixed costs will not change as the number of units of the allocation base changes. We only calculated this amount not to analyze this number, but to allocate these costs onto the different machine hours that would be used within our operating process. Therefore, we need to be careful in analyzing this amount, or we need to understand this amount in according to our definition of the fixed manufacturing overhead, and not to analyze it and not to define it according to this number, which is the $57.5 per machine hour. Any questions? Of course, another thing that we need to consider when determining the budgeted fixed manufacturing overhead, when we need to plan the fixed manufacturing overhead costs, of course, we said we need to emphasize, first of all, the or the activities that adds value. The second thing, or the additional thing that we need to consider in fixed manufacturing overhead costs, in planning these costs, we need to consider what would be the capacity that is needed for the coming period. Of course, the capacity analysis has been discussed in Cost Accounting 1, but here we need to consider, of course, because we are talking about the future here. We are talking about a 12-month period that is expected to be or to happen in the future. Therefore, in setting this amount, $3,312,000, we need to consider what is the actual amount that is needed, what is the actual capacity that is needed for the future. We need, of course, to consider what is the expected number of units that would be produced, and of course, we need to have a little bit of unused capacity. Why do we need this small amount of unused capacity? Because if we have any, let us say, any sudden changes or any sudden increases in our production, therefore, or any sudden increases in our demand, we need to have the capacity in order to cover this sudden increase. Therefore, in determining or in planning the fixed manufacturing overhead cost, we need to consider exactly what is the capacity that is needed in the future, taking into mind that we need to have not the exact capacity for the 144,000 jackets, but we need to have, let us say, a small unused amount of capacity in order to cover any sudden changes or any sudden increases in the demand for our jackets. Any questions? Therefore, as we can see here, the same point that we took in Cost Accounting 1 and in Cost Accounting 2, we are now to consider it. We are now to take it into consideration in order to analyze our variances. We will not be able to analyze our variances unless we understand the way or the method that we use in order to calculate our budgeted rates. Of course, after calculating the budgeted rate, in order to use the standard costing, we need to multiply the budgeted rate by what? By the standard quantity of the allocation base, which is in this case the machine hours, for the actual output. Not like the normal costing, we are not going to multiply the actual quantity, but we are going to multiply the standard quantity. Now let us take the first variance analysis of our first item, which is the variable manufacturing overhead. Of course, according to our level 2 analysis, as we can see here, according to our level 2 analysis that was done in chapter number 7, in the previous chapter, that we have variable manufacturing overhead costs, actual costs, by the amount of $130,500, but according to our flexible budget, it should have been $120,000. Of course, as we can see here, that we should have incurred $120,000, but we have actually incurred $130,500, which is a larger amount than expected. Therefore, we would have an unfavorable variance by the amount of $10,500. Before analyzing what do we mean by the $10,500, we need first of all to understand how did we calculate the $120,000? How did we come up with this amount, $120,000? So, what do you think? How did we calculate, according to our flexible budget, the $120,000? Who can tell me? The same steps that we talked about. According to the steps that we Excellent, excellent. Of course, how did we get the $12 per jacket? The $12, no, this $12 is for the variable manufacturing overhead. We didn't take the $12. From the previous slide, the variable, as we can see here, the variable was not $12, it was $30. But $30 for what? For the machine hour. So how did you get the $12? Therefore, if I know for a fact that $30 is the cost per machine hour, and I know for a fact that each jacket needs 0.4 machine hours. Therefore, per jacket, it would be 0.4 multiplied by $30, which is $12 per jacket. Correct? Therefore, by this, we could calculate the costs, but for jackets, not for machine hours. But we all know that we allocate using the allocation base. Therefore, it is better to allocate our variable manufacturing overhead using the $30 per machine hour, not the $12 per jacket. Of course, both are correct. I'm not saying that the $12 is not correct to be used. It is correct to be used. But it would be better for us in our analysis, as we are going to see later, to use the $30 per machine hour, because how we are going to allocate? What do you think? How we are going to allocate our costs? How we are going to allocate the $1,728,000? By multiplying the $30 by the machine hours, or the standard machine hours, for what? For the actual output. Therefore, according to our flexible budget, what was the actual output? What was the actual number of units? It was 10,000 units, correct? And each unit should use up a standard amount of machine hours by 0.4 machine hours. Correct? Therefore, in order to produce the 10,000 units, we should have used 4,000 machine hours. Correct? Therefore, according to our rate or budgeted rate that we have calculated before, the 4,000 machine hours, each machine hour should cost $30. Therefore, the 4,000 machine hours should cost $120,000. By this, we calculated the amount that was presented in the flexible budget, $120,000. $120,000, which is 0.4 machine hours per jacket, multiplied by 10,000 jackets. Therefore, we need, in order to produce the 10,000, a standard amount of machine hours of 4,000 machine hours. Of course, according to our standard also, the rate or the price per machine hour or the cost per machine hour is $30. Therefore, 30 multiplied by 4,000 is the $120,000. Therefore, as we can see here, there is a difference between the 120,000 and the 130,500 actual result by the amount of 10,500 unfavorable. So what do you think is the reason for this variance? Of course, this is not a detailed variance. As we saw from our analysis of the direct materials and the direct manufacturing labor flexible budget variance, we said that we have two causes that could have caused this flexible budget variance. First of all is the price variance, and the second is the efficiency variance. So now let us consider the variable manufacturing overhead variance. We have a 10,500 unfavorable variance. What do you think the causes of this 10,500 unfavorable variance? And think of it by considering this calculation. So what do you think? What might be the causes of the variance of 10,500 unfavorable variance? We might have, or the variance could be because of the difference between the actual rate and the standard rate. Because as we see here, we used the standard rate. Therefore, maybe the actual rate that was used in order to calculate the actual results was different than the standard rate. Excellent. This is one of the causes. What is the second cause? The machine hours, which is the quantity of the allocation base. This could be the second difference. This could be the second reason between the flexible budget amount and the actual result amount. Therefore, as we can see here, the differences could be caused by two reasons. The first reason could be because of the number of units of the allocation base that has been used to allocate these costs. Maybe the 10,000 units used up more than 4,000 machine hours. Or maybe the 10,000 units used up less than 4,000 machine hours. Therefore, this would most definitely cause a difference between the $120,000 that was calculated according to 4,000 standard machine hours and the actual amount that could have used up more or less than the standard machine hours. Correct? Therefore, cause number one, which is the quantity of the allocation base, or the difference between the budgeted or the standard quantity and the actual quantity of the allocation base. This is called an efficiency variance. Because as we can see here, we are talking about what? Quantity. Therefore, if we used less machine hours, that means we are more efficient, correct? And if we used more machine hours, that means we are less efficient. Therefore, this could be the efficiency variance that also we took in the direct materials and the direct manufacturing labor variance analysis. Now, on the other hand, the second reason could be the difference between the standard or this budgeted rate and the actual rate that was used in order to calculate the actual results. Therefore, maybe the actual rate was more than the $30 or less than the $30. Correct? Therefore, this difference would most definitely cause the amount of $120,000 to be different than the amount of $130,500. Any questions? Therefore, according to our calculation, we now know that the variable manufacturing overhead could be because of the change in quantity or the difference in quantity, or could be because of the difference in the rate between, of course, the budgeted and the actual. Of course, this difference between the budgeted and the actual rates is called a spending, not a price, because as we can see here, the $30 is not the price for only one item of variable manufacturing overhead, because as we said, this is a cost pool which has a lot of items within this cost pool. Therefore, we cannot call it a price, but we can call it a spending variance. Therefore, flexible budget variable manufacturing overhead costs, or variances, could be detailed, could be analyzed onto two different variances. One is the efficiency variance, and the second is the spending variance. Now, let us see how we are going to calculate the efficiency variance. Of course, as we said, the efficiency variance is the difference between the budgeted quantity of the allocation base, in this case the machine hours for the actual output, and the actual number of units of the allocation base also for the actual output. Therefore, we are going to determine this efficiency variance by comparing these amounts. What was the actual amount of machine hours that was used, and what was the budgeted amount of machine hours that should have been used in order to produce the 10,000 units. Of course, we all know, according to our flexible budget analysis, that we need to use 4,000 machine hours, correct? But according to our actual results, we have actually used 4,500 machine hours. We used more machine hours. Therefore, using more machine hours, it means less efficient. It means that we are going to incur more costs. Therefore, we would have an unfavorable efficiency variance. Of course, according to our standard, each unit should use 0.4 machine hour. But according to our actual results, we use 0.45 machine hours to produce 1 unit. So, what do you think is the reasons of using more machine hours? We need now to analyze. Of course, we are going to, as we can see here, this is the actual amounts and the flexible budget amounts. Both are according to 10,000 units. The actual results was according to 0.45 machine hours per jacket, but according to our standard, it was only 0.4. Therefore, we should have used 4,000 machine hours according to our standard, but we have used 4,500 machine hours, which is more than our standard, more than what we expected. Of course, the cost was 120,000, but according to our actual results, it was 130,500. The rate, as you can see here, the variable manufacturing overhead rate was according to our expectations, according to our calculation, it was $30. The 1,728,000, I think, divided by 57,600 gave us the amount of $30. But here, according to our actual results, it was not $30, but $29. Therefore, we have difference in efficiency, which is an efficiency variance, difference between the budgeted and actual machine hours. And we also have a difference between the budgeted and actual cost allocation rates. Therefore, we will also have a spending variance. But we are now considering the efficiency variance. We are going to use the level 3 analysis that we took in chapter number 7, the same format. We have 3 columns. We start by the actual, as we can see here, which is the actual input quantity multiplied by the actual rate, not price, of course, because this is a rate. 4,500 hours multiplied by the actual rate of $29 per hour would give us the 130,500. According to our flexible budget, we need to use only 4,000 machine hours, as we just discussed, multiplied by the budgeted rate also by the amount of $30. In order to calculate the efficiency variance, we need only to consider the difference between the quantities only. As we can see here, we have 2 differences here between the flexible amount and the actual amount. We have difference in the number of machine hours, and we also have difference in the budgeted and actual rate. Therefore, in order to divide our flexible budget variance onto two variances, we need to consider a second column, which is the actual input quantity multiplied by the budgeted rate. The difference between column 1 and column 2, as you can see, is between the rates. Therefore, this is the spending variance. And as we can see here, the difference between column number 2 and column number 3 is only according to the quantity of the machine hours or the quantity of the allocation base for the actual output. Therefore, the actual input quantity, as we said, was 4,500 multiplied by the budgeted rate, which is the $30. Of course, the amount is 135,000. Therefore, as we can see here, we should have incurred $120,000, but we have incurred $135,000, which is more than what was expected. Therefore, this is an unfavorable efficiency variance by the amount of $15,000. So now we need to understand, we need to make our interpretation. We have calculated the amount, but we need to interpret now this amount. Why or what do you think the reasons or what do you think the causes of this variance? Yes. Excellent, excellent. Less skilled, or let us say we had employees that are not as skilled as was expected. We expected them to produce one jacket by or using 0.4 machine hours, but the actual results indicated that they used more machine hours. Therefore, maybe they are not as skilled as we expected. What else? Yes? In the standard, or there's something wrong with the machine itself? The machine itself may be excellent. Maybe the machines are not well maintained. Maybe the machines are taking longer to produce the jackets because they had some problems. They had some difficulties within the machines. Why? Because we did not maintain or repair these machines, or we did not schedule maintenance for these machines. Of course, this is a reason, or one of the reasons, or could be one of the reasons. Yes.
Overtime that can you put in one job or one for more than one production?
I didn't understand.
And there were more than one production, or
we have more than one production line.
Yeah, and who works need overtime.
You mean, but we are talking about here the standard machine hours for the actual output. Therefore, according to our actual output, the 10,000 units, we should have used 4,000 machine hours. Therefore, if we had 20,000, we should have used 8,000. Therefore, the difference here is not because of the change of the 10,000 units.
The machine hours.
Yes.
We need more machine hours because of overtime.
Because of overtime. But why did we need the overtime?
Because maybe our sellers say that we will deliver it quickly. Or
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Therefore, excellent. Sometimes, let us say, the salespersons would have deals with some of the customers, and they would promise the customers to deliver these products according to a schedule or according to a timetable. Therefore, maybe we needed a rush job. Therefore, we used more machine hours than expected. Because, of course, if we are talking about under-skilled workers and they they were rushed into making some of or more than expected number of units, therefore it might taking them more longer in order to produce one jacket than expected. What else? We might have a problem in the standard itself. always, when we are talking about expectations, when we are talking about standards, we need to consider this as the first cause or the first reason. Maybe we said that we need 0.4 machine hours according to our expectations, but maybe our expectations were wrong. Maybe we had problems in determining this number. Maybe the right number was the 0.45, not the 0.4, or maybe it was let us say the correct number would be 0.425, for instance, and so on. Therefore, maybe we have a problem in setting the standard itself. Yes?
Maybe the material itself have less quality.
Excellent.
And that need more working process to get the required
Excellent,
quality.
excellent, excellent. Therefore, as we took in chapter number 7, we said we might have some problems in the quality of the direct materials itself. Therefore, if we had problems in the quality of the direct materials, therefore, we used, for instance, more labor hours in order, which was one of the reasons to have unfavorable efficiency variances in the direct labor hours, or the direct labor manufacturing overhead, or the direct labor or the direct manufacturing labor costs. Therefore, the less quality of the direct materials could have used up more machine hours. Why? Because we used up more quantities of the direct materials themselves. Therefore, these are or might be the reasons of this difference between the budgeted quantity and the actual quantity of the allocation base. Of course, we have finished for today. We are going to complete our analysis the next time, inshallah.